Good morning. Happy First Ladies Day. My name is Laura Ingalls Gunn, and today I'm going to be talking about our first First Lady, Martha Dandridge Custis Washington. And how I began this journey, I often like to say that all roads lead back to Laura Ingalls Wilder in my life. And when I was at Laurapalooza last year, I was presenting there, and also in attendance was Reverend Nicholas Inman, and you may know him as the founder of the Cherry Blossom Festival, as well as the director of Rocky Ridge, which is Laura's home not far from here in Mansfield, Missouri, and it is run as a museum and historical site, and he is the director there, and it is an amazing undertaking. And he approached me after my presentation and asked for this year if I would present on a First Lady. And I thought about it for a moment, and I was already making plans to dip my toe into the world of 18th century historical sewing in preparation for a fairly big celebration that is happening in America this year. July 4th, 2026, we will celebrate the anniversary of the signing of When We Told England to Go Jump in a Lake or the ocean and proclaimed our independence. So this presentation was geared towards America 250. Now, in terms of which First Lady I would give a talk on, I said, well, because it's America 250, there really can be only one First Lady that I can speak with. But also, since we're so close to Laura's home, and many of you know me from my Laura Ingalls Wilder historical presentations, I would like to do Martha Washington, and there's an added bonus in that both Laura and myself are cousins to President George Washington. You can kind of see our family tree, and it's a little bit blurry. On my website next week, I will be posting these images, but over in the corner is George Washington. At the tippy top is myself. Down a bit where it sort of says Lansford Ingalls, that's also the connection. So in terms of, I love historical fashions, so what would I recreate? I started looking at some of the garments that are attributed to Martha Washington. And this pink silk gown is currently in the National Museum of Natural History. And it is a beautiful Italian-style gown from the 1780s, and it is hand-painted with flora and fauna, an incredible, incredible gown. And I went down a deep rabbit hole of learning everything I could, studying the pattern, the construction, and they even had posted the measurements of the gown, of, you know, how tall would the wearer be, the waist measurement. And I want you to keep that little tidbit in the back of your mind as we move through this journey, because measurements are going to become important. So in addition to that research, I started really researching fashion historians, textile artists who also were currently working or had worked on previous projects in regards to Martha Washington. And on our right is a recreation of Martha Washington's purple round gown. And this was an amazing project that was started in 2020 by Dr. Cynthia Chin. And if you Google her name, you can find all of her research information. And I learned so much from her about who Martha Washington was, because I have to admit to you, when I first went on this journey, I didn't know much more than she was married to George Washington. Now, on the far left is an image of Catherine Bright Brown. Mrs. Bright Brown is the historical costumer at Mount Vernon. So if you aren't familiar, Mount Vernon is the historical home of George and Martha Washington. It is a historical site and museum, and I encourage you to go visit it. In preparation of America 250, Mount Vernon was creating an exhibit of which Catherine Bright Brown and Brooke Wellborn were recreating garments worn by individuals who lived at Mount Vernon. And Brooke Wellborn, who is seated in the center photo wearing blue, she is someone that I have followed for several years. She is a mantua maker, and mantua maker was a term used in the 18th century and earlier to describe a dressmaker. And Brooke will often say that she grew up at Colonial Williamsburg, and she also did an internship there as a mantua maker. She is extremely skilled and knowledgeable about 18th century historical clothing, as is Miss Bright Brown. Now, at Mount Vernon, they have archives of clothing and accessories that were worn by members of the Washington family. With our new technology and tools that we have, they have determined, based on garments in their collection that belonged to Martha Washington, that she was between 5'2" and 5'3" inches tall, and her waist was around 31 to 33 inches, and her shoe size was a size 7. They have her wedding shoes that she wore when she married George Washington, and I am also a size 7 and asked if I could have them, and they said no. Very disappointing, very disappointing. But if you go on their website and look at some of the collections, you can see the shoes. They're absolutely beautiful. And we kind of know that Martha liked a high heel. So I met Brooke Wellborn last year at the National Jane Austen Festival. I was there to give a presentation because I also like the Regency era and Jane Austen and everything associated with that. She was there with the company she works with, Burnley and Trowbridge, and they are located in Williamsburg, Virginia. And they are a company that specializes in patterns, sewing notions, and fabrics to recreate historical garments. And so one of the things that Burnley and Trowbridge also offers from time to time are small classes on how to create your own 18th century fashion. And I had looked at their roster of classes, and I noted that Miss Wellborn was teaching a class in a gown called an English gown, which was very popular during the time Martha was alive. And because I needed to know more about 18th century sewing skills, in January, if you remember, we had that huge freeze all across America. That's when I was traveling to Virginia. It was 14 degrees. I live in Texas. It was a little bit chilly for me. But you can see I was creating an English gown in green silk, and Brooke is assisting in setting the sleeve on that garment. For 18th century sewing, the sleeve construction is slightly different, and if you're not experienced, which that at that time would have been me, it's a two-person job. Now, since I was going to be in Williamsburg, I wrote to the museum archives at Colonial Williamsburg and let them know that I was going to be doing this research project. And could I come look at some of their archives, specifically around 1776? And the associate curator, Tessa Payer, wrote back to me and invited me to spend a morning with her. And I cannot thank her enough. When you can actually see a historical garment first person, look at the stitching, look at the construction, even the fabric that was produced back then, because it was done by hand and not machine, it's very different. So to train your eye, it's just an invaluable resource. So that she so graciously gave of her time was amazing. So feeling a little bit, this is so wonderful, I wonder if I traveled to Mount Vernon and asked if maybe Catherine Bright Brown would want to speak with me about her wonderful project for America 250. So I wrote to her because she's a rock star in my world. She wrote back and she said yes. And then she did one better. She said, I'm going to contact Amanda Isaac, who you see to the left of me in the blue jacket. She is the curator of Mount Vernon's archives. And she said, I would love to show you Martha Washington's clothing. Now, after I picked myself up the floor from smelling salts, I have to say, when we read about historical figures, they often remain just that, historical figures in our mind. But once I spent that time and I started looking at Martha Washington's stockings, her stays, her dress, I kind of got a better sense of who she is. Often, who our personality is often comes out in what we wear, our accessories. It was no different in Martha Washington's day. And that was the moment she became a real person to me. And I am just so grateful to these wonderful ladies for helping me to further my journey on this research. Now, it was during this time that we were discussing measurements because I was curious about what size, and I knew if anyone was going to have that information, it was Mount Vernon. And indeed, they did have all that based on new technology. And what I learned is it is highly unlikely that Martha Washington wore the pink gown. And so I was like, oh, it's January, and my presentation is in April, and I was going to be hand stitching everything because that's historically accurate in the 18th century. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do now. And so that's when I started looking at portraiture of Martha Washington. And the first known portrait of Martha Washington was done by an artist named John Wollaston. Now, Martha Dandridge married one of her neighbors, Daniel Parke Custis, and that was in 1750, and they welcomed 4 children together. And in looking at this portrait, I learned that there was a companion portrait of her husband Daniel and of her 2 youngest children. And so then I started looking at dates. And at that point, I realized that the reason that there was only a picture of Martha and Daniel's 2 youngest children is they had lost their eldest son at age 3, their eldest daughter at age 4. During that time period, Martha also was grieving the loss of her father, John Dandridge. So just an incredible amount of loss in a short time. We know that the portrait was painted in sometime in 1757, earlier in the year. And in July of 1757, shortly after the portraits were made, her husband suddenly passed away. And he had a huge estate. He died without a will. So as per the custom of the time, 1/3 went to his survivors, meaning Martha and her 2 children. Since they were minors, she would have to overlook their share. So she is managing this complete estate. And we know within 2 weeks, she was having to write merchants, creditors, etc., to let them know her husband had passed away. She would be handling things, which was somewhat rare during this timeline. And I start thinking about her really as a woman, as a mother, that she's lost all of these crucial relationships. And she kept going. Her strength of character, her perseverance, and keeping in mind she was 26 years old. That's an incredible person. If she never did anything else in her life, that is amazing, because she ran the estate and she ran it well. And so I really started thinking about this gown as a symbol of her amazing character and perseverance, because she's inspirational. But I just was looking at what she was wearing, and I was like, I'm fairly new to this era and the historical fashion timeline, but I'm looking at it, and it just wasn't quite right. So what it reminded me of is an earlier style gown that we have extant examples of around 1730. Now, the thing about portraiture in this time is that pretty much only the wealthy could afford portraiture, the monarchy, the gentry, and you would really show off in your portraiture. You would wear your most expensive clothing and jewels. And so I was thinking, why would she wear something from the 1730s when it's almost 1760s? So I was like, there's still a mystery there. Now, in addition to a degree in interior design, I have a degree in art history. And I know that when we look at portraiture and paintings of this time, they can often solve the mystery. And so I started looking at other artists that were prominent in the time and the subjects, what they were wearing specifically in the year 1757. And over overwhelmingly, the sitters, the subjects of the paintings, were wearing a style of gown called the robe à la Française, which translates into the French gown. But of course, at this time, the English hate the French and the French hate the English, so the English called it a sackback gown. And there are two spellings that you'll see of the sackback gown. But then I really started looking at the artist John Wollaston. Now, he came to America, which was then the colonies, in 1749. And he was a really prolific portrait painter. He worked in several of the colonies, and specifically in the Virginia colony from 1755 to 1757. And that fit the timeline, so then I started going further down the rabbit hole. And just in the Virginia colony, in that short of amount of time, I found no less than 8 portraits and engravings by the artist John Wollaston of women in the Virginia colony that he painted. They all had one thing in common. They were all faux pas wearing the same dress. Well, how does this happen? Well, it wasn't uncommon that they are going to prep their canvas ahead of time. They're going to add in the background, they're going to sketch out a figure, and then once they're in front of the individual that's sitting for the portrait, then they're going to sketch out the face, note any distinguishing physical attributes, so that the individual that's seated in front of them does not have to sit as long. And so it became clearly evident that John Wollaston was a fan of this method. He found a method that he was good at, and he went with it. He went with it well. At least Elizabeth Bird got a little pink hat to differentiate herself. And it should be I want to note that the woman in the center, Betty Washington Lewis, she is dressed and seated almost exactly in the same position as Martha Dandridge Custis. The only way to really differentiate is her silk petticoat and her stomacher is in white silk satin, and Martha Dandridge Custis was in gold silk satin. And I wonder, once they became sister-in-laws, did they compare their portraits? And so then I'm thinking, okay, now it's February, and the dress she's wearing in this portrait, that's not her dress either. I really need to start stitching. What am I going to do? So I start thinking about the other portraiture, and I start digging. I wonder if she owned a robe à la Française or a sackback gown. So I start digging, and indeed, so not too long after her husband Daniel passed away, she did marry George Washington, and that was fairly common for the time. And we have a letter that George Washington was sending to Robert Carey and Company, dated September 28th of 1760. And they were a merchant house that George Washington sent his tobacco crop to over in England, because of course the revolution hasn't happened yet. And at this time, you're sending everything to England, and then they keep your money in a little pot, and you can order things from merchants that they'll then put on a ship to you in the colonies. It was the very slow version of Amazon. And so you can also, the dressmaking is for a certain level in society, is still primarily being done in England at this time for people living in the colonies. And so George Washington writes, Mrs. Washington sends home a green sack to get cleaned or fresh dyed of the same color, made up into a handsome sack again, would be her choice. What are they saying? They spoke a little bit differently 250 years ago. Well, so in the 18th century, mantua making, dressmaking, the labor was not what was expensive. It was the material. It was the cloth. Because again, it's all being done, by hand on looms, woven, very precious, particularly the gorgeous silk cloth. So it was not unusual that as the fashions changed, or maybe, again, here's the word, your measurements are changing, because again, Martha Dandridge Custis Washington had given birth to 4 children in 7 years. It's possible her measurements had changed. So she's wanting to take that sack gown and have the mantua maker maybe let it out, maybe take it in. Maybe the fashion that year is ruffled robings or a swag at the side, but that's what she's asking. She wants her green sack gown to get a makeover, so to speak. And so if we go to the next slide, I'm still trying to get a sense of her style. And Mount Vernon, in their archives, has letters and ledgers to Carey and Company. She liked pretty things. She loved beautiful English lace, footwear, bonnets, and large amounts of Spitalfield silk was being sent over to mantua maker John Sherberg to create garments for the Washington family members. Spitalfield silk is the creme de la creme of silk at this time. She likes the good stuff. Now, as we're moving into the Revolutionary period, it became a badge of honor to wear homespun, because now we're dealing with the Stamp Act and we're dealing with the Townshend Act, and people are rebelling. They're getting angry, so they're not going to import luxury goods anymore, but you can't wear rags either. Now, what we think of homespun cloth today is a little bit different than what it meant 250 years ago. So at this time, there are no cotton, linen, or wool mills in the colonies. That would not happen until after the Revolution in the 1790s. The first silk mill would not come into existence until 1810 in this country. So where are we getting our fabric? It's primarily women living in their homes, creating homespun cloth. They are at their spinning wheels. They've sheared their sheep. They're spinning it into wool. They're weaving it. So this became a badge of honor to wear homespun cloth. And go back a little bit. Just one, yes. So we know that records of Mount Vernon, George Washington, on his estate, he had some wonderful sheep. And there were approximately 15 enslaved spinners, seamstresses, and knitters who were at Mount Vernon producing cloth. And we know the names of some of these women: Moll, Carolyn Branham, Charlotte, Betty, Ona Judge. Now, Ona Judge, we could do an entire presentation just on her. Her story is incredible. Please look into her because she is amazing. And as I'm doing all of this research, I'm trying to find a credible source that Martha Washington wore homespun cloth. Now, what do I mean by a credible source? A letter, a bill of sale, something tangible that is still in existence, a diary, a first-person account that there is an established relationship. So I, in my journey, could not find any credible sources. I also asked Mount Vernon during my time there, and they don't believe that Martha Washington wore homespun. As Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, throughout the American Revolution, General Washington had access to illegal cargo ships that were coming in. Throughout the dawn of time, human beings, if there's a chance to make money, they're gonna make it, and the black market was alive and well during the American Revolution. And so, you know, we know at this point, in terms of Mrs. Washington's style, she's extremely frugal. She is remaking her gowns. And the other custom of the day is as the gowns wore out, they would then take the sections of fabric that were still good and refashion them into smaller clothing items, such as vests or pockets. And we'll talk about pockets in a minute. And then even smaller bits of fabric were made into quilts. Now it is absolutely documented that Martha Washington was an amazing needle worker, very highly skilled, beautiful work. And in the quilt pin treaty, which is on display at Mount Vernon, you can see this quilt that features scraps of her and her family's clothing that is still in existence, still in the archives. She did not waste anything. You know, even though they were wealthy, everything was precious. She was such a sense of support to her husband during this time. And every winter when he would set up camp, she would leave the comforts of Mount Vernon to go be by his side. And as I mentioned earlier, when we were there, it was 14 degrees. And I thought about, as I was walking all over their estate, which is quite extensive, and I was freezing to death in my modern warm outerwear, and I'm thinking about the soldiers in their bare feet, because some of them didn't have shoes, and living in tents. And that she went there to ensure she could boost the morale of those soldiers. Oftentimes the women are not credited enough for what they did to assist us in the American Revolution. And I want you to know that Martha Washington, in my opinion, everything she did to assist, because she was her husband's #1 confidant. Truly, truly amazing. So once we have won the revolution and General Washington becomes president, the couple wanted to avoid any appearance of aristocracy or court culture. What do I mean by court culture? Well, in the center, we have a painting of the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette. And I was talking a little bit earlier that you often really displayed your wealth in portraiture. She is putting on a show. Look at that dress. That is copious amounts of silk, ruffles, swag, lace, ribbon, embellishments, and then in the back, she has a blue velvet robe with gold fleur-de-lis, which is the emblem of France. She is showing her power in this portrait. And on the right is the Prince of Wales, the son of King George III. He is outfitted in his best Order of the Garter regalia. And again, once I post this, you can see there are layers of lace and froth and embroidery, and oh, he is a dandy. When you look at the portraiture in contrast of the Washington family, they are subdued. There's not a lot of embellishment. Tasteful, absolutely elegant. Now, we do have a very credible first-person resource. Abigail Adams, the wife of then Vice President John Adams. So there's an absolute establishment. We know these ladies knew each other. She wrote a letter to her sister and noted of Martha Washington's appearance. She is plain in her dress, but that plainness is the best of every article. So again, she's saying the style is very streamlined. There's no embellishment, but boy howdy, that fabric is the best money can buy. There is no nicer lace, there's no better silk. So again, I'm pretty confident now that I have a sense in what Martha Washington's style is. So I decided to go ahead and start constructing an 18th century robe à la Française, and I'd like to introduce to you my daughter-in-law, Megan. Now, she's new to our family, and I have to brag on her a minute. I won the lottery. This lovely lady, she also sews. She loves costuming, and she's ready to be in her underwear in front of strangers. And so right now, we have Megan in a state of undress, and she is going to start removing the ribbon closure of her cassakin jacket. This is, in the mornings when the ladies were at their ease, perhaps in their private quarters, they would perhaps have on a gown like this, or a longer floor-length bedgown. And then as they get ready for the day, they are going to don a clean chemise. And this is, you need a lady's maid. This is primarily going to be made of linen. All classes of women are going to be wearing a chemise. The difference is just going to be the quality of the linen. Women who are wealthier are going to have a finer linen. And this chemise will go to about mid-calf. It is made from linen because linen absorbs body oils and perspiration. So that's going to keep your expensive silk outer garments cleaner longer. Just like our undergarments that we wear today, this is regularly washed. She's gonna have a cap on in the winter. It's going to help keep her warm, but also the purpose serves to keep her hair clean and tidy. Women of this time, they're possibly cooking over open hearths, so you don't want your hair in your face. There's, scrubbing laundry. So their daily functions of the day, they need their hair up and protected. Now at Mount Vernon, they do have a pair of Mrs. Washington's stockings, and true to form, they are plain cream silk stockings, and Meg has on her plain cream silk stockings. We also gave her a high heel. I'm wearing a lower heel, but we know that Martha liked her high heels. And these are tied in place with garters. I also won the lottery in that Megan's mother is a truly exceptional seamstress and embroidery work. And Megan's pocket, this is what they would have carried for their purse. All the embroidery was done by Megan's mother, Michelle. And so what's going to go in a woman's pocket if she's going into town? Perhaps some coins, her shopping list. This little device is called a Hussif, which is the German word for housewife. And it's got little pockets. She might put her sewing supplies, anything she might need for the day. And then it rolls up. And these were carried by both men and women for many centuries. And out in the vestibule, if you want a modern day snack pack or jewelry roll, those are going to be out there. But then we can stick it in her pocket, and she is going to have access. She is next going to put on a under petticoat, which it's out of linen. And of course, we saw her shoes. You're good. Yes. And so you may see that she is wearing a supportive garment. Now, this is known as stays. This is the precursor to the corset that they wore in the Victorian era. For Martha's portrait in 1757, this would have been the style of stays that she would have worn, and this laces up the back. Megan is wearing a style that was more evident after the Revolutionary time period. And so we have next is her panniers. This is going to give us the shape. And from that, she's now going to lay her exterior petticoats. So you can go and don the exterior petticoat. And of course, in terms of your garters and your pockets and your stockings, this is where a lady can have some fun. Definitely the pockets aren't going to be shown to the general public. You can embroider them with your favorite string quartet, whatever you might want. And in terms of stockings, they could be striped. They might have a design called a clocked stocking. And that was evident also in the garters that they would have tied. And sometimes with that looks perfect, Megan. So this is now her exterior petticoat. These designs were actually pretty ingenious because you notice that she tied the skirt on. Most women during this time would have spent most of, if they were married, pregnant or postpartum. They had very large families, and so as a woman is expanding or going back to her previous state, she doesn't have to buy a new wardrobe. So the next thing she's going to add is this center stomacher. And the beauty of a stomacher is you can go to day to night in a flash. You just have to remove your stomacher and you can get something a little bit more sparkly. And I don't know if you can see, but by candlelight, the metal spangles and the pearls and the gold work embroidery would be quite spectacular. And it was just an easy way to update your outfit. And We also know that Martha Washington loved her jewelry. They have quite the collection at Mount Vernon. And in the corner, you see a pair of her red garnet earrings. She loved garnets. There are several pieces. And after this presentation is finished, we are going to move out into the vestibule so that the next speaker can come on. But at that point, we can show you up close some of these garments, because I do realize that it is hard to see the detail. Because the silk and some of the lace I use is vintage or antique, we just ask that you keep your hands in your pockets. But you'll be able to see up close that Megan is wearing a reproduction of Martha Washington's garnet earrings. And then last is going to be the robe à la Française. And the distinguishing detail of the robe à la Française is the deep pleats. And this also gets pinned into position. So again, completely adjustable to her, I'll do that so you don't poke yourself. So in terms of a day-to-day life, she might also choose to add in a fichu to cover her neckline, because we don't have sunscreen at this time. And as noted, you saw little jackets. They could absolutely, instead of a full-length gown, just put this little jacket that she took off over, and that would have also been absolutely acceptable. They came in a wide variety of styles and had names such as caraco, Perot, and in keeping with the idea of protecting yourself, most of the sleeve fashions of this time ended around the elbow. So these are little mitts that you can also see up on the screen. This is a wool pair and a linen pair. So the wool might be worn in the winter, the linen in the summer, if they need a bit of extra coverage. And if she needs a little extra lift, we can give her a mantelette. And cloaks that went down to ankle length would have been worn, capes which hit at your hip, and then mantelettes were a little bit shorter. Sometimes they're also referred to as mantles. And this design that I recreated is based on this portraiture. There are extant examples that they were often lined in pink. One of the distinguishing factors of the earlier mantles is the fan pleated back. And I did make it in white and pink. This is a touch of cherry blossom for you. So in addition, if they wanted to have a little bit more fun, there was a wide variety of headgear available. Now this style of hat is the bergère. It came in a wide variety of sizes. It could be worn plain, embellished. Some ladies opted to cover it in silk. And again, every woman would have had a hat. This is what's known as a market bonnet. Market bonnets were in style for many, many years in the 18th century. This one is a later style. Towards the end of the 18th century, hairstyles started to get really elaborate. So what changed was the interior so that it would fit over. And I apologize, you can see on the end, the woman is wearing a black market hat over her big hair. Now, it's America 250, and we feel like celebrating, and so I'm wearing what's known today as a cake hat. The cake hat was just a hat during that time period, and you see on fashion plates, it's often just listed as a chapeau, which is the French word for hat. I did find one fashion plate that said chapeau à la Turque, which means in the Turkish style, which didn't help me a bit either. So we're just gonna call it a cake hat. And our last slide, I usually don't like group projects because I'm the type of person, I want to get an A, and so I do the work, and somebody else doesn't pull their weight. This was an amazing group project, and I have so many people that have helped me on this journey. Of course, the individuals at Colonial Williamsburg, Burnley and Trowbridge, Mount Vernon, and I am very, very blessed indeed that where I live, I have some friends that are nerdy like me, and they love 18th century, and they're very well versed. They've been doing it for years, and they absolutely inspected and assisted with my work. And of course, my family members, Megan, my son is here, my husband is here. This dress, this ensemble, is about 250 hours of work from head to toe. My husband did the cooking. Yeah, that's why I was able to do that. And of course, my two most faithful companions, Ponyboy is on the left, Gracie is on the right. Anytime I was seated hand stitching, that was their invitation to join in. And I thank you all. And as we conclude this journey, again, in the next few weeks on my website, I am going to be looking at each of these individual garments that I made, sharing my research, sharing how they were constructed in case you're a seamstress and you would like to join me in the madness. And so that'll be on my website. You're welcome to screenshot. And I will be making some YouTube videos to also show you some construction methods. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and all the bells and whistles. And I thank you so much for your time. I did go slightly over, so again, I'll move out into the vestibule. If you would like to look at the garments more closely, you have questions, you want photos, we're happy to help. But Meg, let's give us a twirl and walk a little bit back.